Happy August to you. Hard to believe we're in the month of August now, but so it is. Summer is winding down, and everybody's in a mad dash to get their last-minute vacations in. And I hope that wherever they may be this morning, and of course where you are here, that the Lord will indeed bless us. We're in Matthew this morning, Matthew 13. And so if you have your Bibles, or as often is the case, your biblical facsimiles, I'll ask you to follow along with me as I read to you Matthew 13, the first 23 verses. It says, "That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake, and such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. And then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. And as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100 or 60 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let him hear." The disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to people in parables?" And he replied, "The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. And those who have will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And as for those who do not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. Truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Listen to what the parable of the sower means. When people hear the message about the kingdom and do not understand it, why the evil one comes and snatches it away that was sown in their hearts. This is the seed that is along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to people who hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they do not have any root, they last only a short time. And when trouble or persecution comes along because of the word, why they quickly fall away. The seed following along thorns refers to people who hear the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to people who hear the word and understand it. They produce a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. This is the word of the Lord. One of the greatest pieces of music ever written is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Almost 200 years old now, 1824. The way the orchestra begins violently with that first movement, and lively and repetitive and really playfully in that second movement, and then the quiet and beautiful third, and then finally to the ultimate fourth, incorporating the great poem by Schiller, which we now call the Ode to Joy. If you've ever had a chance to listen to it, CD or audio, you know what I'm talking about. But if you've ever had a chance to watch it, it is an amazing piece to be a part of. You know, when it was first premiered, the audience gave Beethoven 5 standing ovations. But the irony is that Beethoven couldn't hear a note of it. At that time, he was completely deaf. Even though he wrote every single note and had it all worked out, he didn't hear the accolades that he had received. So one might say, he didn't hear anything of it. Or did he? Yeah, I think he did. I think he heard it more than anyone else because not only, of course, did he craft this particular piece, this marvelous work, but he did more than that. It was a part of who he was. He heard it here. And it just goes to show that many times people may hear something, but very few people listen. There was a crowd that decided to come into that area one day. They had heard that this itinerant preacher had come to their region, and the people started coming in droves. Oh, there were no tickets needed. You didn't have to go to Ticketmaster or anywhere else to try to get a ticket that day. No, you just came. And they came in wave upon wave, and there were so many of them who came on that particular day that the teacher had to get out into a boat in order to begin talking to them. And so with rapt attention, they began to hear what he had to say. And he began thusly: a sower went out to sow, and he scattered seed upon the ground, and it went on flat ground, and the birds came and ate it up. And then it went over on rocky or shallow ground, and it began to grow for a little while, but then all of a sudden the sun came and scorched it and it withered. Still other seed went into ground with thorns, and all of a sudden it was competitive with that thorny plant as well. And eventually that thorny plant just began to choke the life out of that good plant. But still others, it went on to good soil. And it germinated and grew and began to grow and blossom and produce fruit. Why, 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has an ear, let him hear. And you can imagine what happened right after that. There were probably audience members saying, Gladys, you brought me all the way here to listen to this? Let's get out of here. Come on, kids, back in the SUV. Still others were like, oh, I want to become part of the teacher's fan club. I will continue and go on. Why, you have such great sermons. You have great teachings. I love them. But then when it came to application, not really. And they kind of drifted away. And then there were others that were going on, but then there were just one thing after another thing after another thing, pile up, pile up, pile up, pile up, pile up. And they were gone too. But then there was one group that kind of stayed behind. You know, I think Brent Thomason's here. I think I heard his laugh. And they stayed after the lecture and said, you want to explain to me what you're talking about? Why do you speak in parables? And that's when Jesus said it. I do this simply because you're the ones that get it, because you're the ones who stayed after the lecture. But there are so many others that don't, and it was already written. It's already been written, and he starts talking about Isaiah 6. Now, most of us, when we hear Isaiah 6, we only hear that first part of the chapter, right? That part where Isaiah sees the Lord high and lifted up, and his train fills the temple, and the clouds fill with smoke, and the seraphim, whatever those are, begin to say, holy, holy, holy. And as he sees God for who he is, he begins to see himself for who he is. And he begins to confess. And we see that the seraph comes with a live coal and begins to, heal him, atone him of his sin. And then he hears the word of the Lord. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And Isaiah, send me, send me. And then God says to Isaiah, I want you to tell them this message. And for whatever reason, we don't ever read that part. Wouldn't it make sense to read the message that Isaiah was supposed to say? Here's what the message was. Tell the people this: be ever hearing but never listening. Be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of these people calloused. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, turn with their hearts, and be healed. And Isaiah said, how long do you want me to do that? And God said, until the city's lying without inhabitant. Until basically there's no one else left in the room. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems rather strange. Why would God have Isaiah tell a message that says, hey, listen to this, don't listen. Hey, see this, don't see. It's called irony. It's called irony. Of course, God wanted them to hear the message. Of course, God wanted them to see what he was saying. But see, God knew that that's exactly how people react. Many hear, but few listen. When I talk about Isaiah 6 in class, a lot of times I make sure and strategically do it about 5 minutes before class is up. And here's the reason why. Nobody's listening anymore. They're all putting their books and stuff in book bags. They're already scrolling to find out what's going on or texting somebody else saying, be careful with what Gore's saying today. You know, all those different things that go on in class. And all of a sudden, I will simply say this as we close with Isaiah 6. I said, now, if I just simply tell you that this is what's going on, that's one thing. But if I say, okay, the last 15 minutes are going to be on the test, and I close up everything and I walk out the door, guess what happened? What just happened? What just happened? Was he serious? And of course, when we were doing things live on video, on recording, I would just shut the video off. And everybody thought, what's wrong with my computer? But a couple people go, oh, I see what you did there. Yeah, only a few. Only a few. And you begin to go, why is that? Why is it that it's only a few? Because it always is. It always is. I don't care how many times the message is shared. I don't care how many times people hear the message. The fact is, few listen, because see what happens is, listening is more than just simply a response. Listening is now actually doing what was asked you to do. And that's the whole point. So when Jesus gives this parable and he shares this parable, we usually call it the parable of the sower or the parable of the seed. But the way Matthew 13 talks about it is actually the parable of the soils. And he begins talking about, well, one might say 4 categories. But will you hear it again? Maybe for the first time? The first category, of course, is the one that receives the seed, and they're the hard, flat soil. Obviously, the seed doesn't even make a dent. One might say it went in one ear and out the other. There for a moment and gone, you hardly even knew that it had happened. And it may not have been that they've never heard it before. They could have heard it so many different times that it no longer makes an impression upon them. Or it could be that they did hear it for the first time and it still didn't make an impression. We don't have it. We just simply do not know. It can happen either way. When I lived near Southwestern Seminary, I mean just right across the street over in student housing, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe train, which is also the Amtrak line that heads to San Antonio, would come usually about an hour a day. And I mean all hours of the day. So say 2 o'clock in the morning and you didn't realize that was going to happen. And all of a sudden, you swear the train's coming through your living room. It wakes you up. But what was rather fascinating is the longer I lived there, I realized the engineer was very compassionate to us all at the seminary and just didn't sound the horn anymore. No, that's not what happened. My brain shut the sound out. That's why so many people die of level crossings that live very close to them. They no longer hear the warning sound of the train horn. Well, the second one that he mentions is the one that falls on rocky or shallow soil. You know, the seed germinates and it begins to grow, but after that, it just doesn't happen much. It kind of fizzles out. There's some hearing and there's some activity, but very little to no response at all. So they are the kind of folks that become, kind of big fans. Hey, let's go listen to this guy. Let's go hear this person that's here. More like a social gathering, a social club, something to do on Sunday because there's not much else to do on Sunday, especially when football season is over. They may look good on the outside, but on the inside, there's really not a whole lot going on there. Jesus called them whitewashed tombs. They played the part, but there was nothing there. I think a modern way of saying it today might be pew warmers. People who love a good sermon, and they love to hear it, but when you ask them, oh, what was the sermon about today? Oh, I can't remember. It was about something, but it was good. Oh, it was good. The third type of soil is the thorny soil. This is the one that where it began to grow, but then all of a sudden the thorns began to overpower the good plant. They grew for a while together, but eventually it just took over and then choked the life out of the plant because it needed the nourishment of the soil. So the poor plant had no way to live, and therefore it died. When I was a pastor in Oklahoma during my seminary days, I would meet folks who I would say were the thorny soiled folks. I'd go visit them. They had been on the church roll, or people said, you need to go visit this person or this person. So I'd go visit. And somewhere in the midst of the conversation, right after, how are you? How's the weather? Boy, thank you for the coffee. Then all of a sudden I would get this. Well, I ought to be back in church. I really ought to. And I will be. I'll be there one day. But I'll tell you, Pastor, I've got a lot to do. I've got the kids that have to get ready for school. I've got Johnny or Susie that needs to get ready for college. I've got to get my house paid off. I've got to. And that was it. What happened was life got in the way. And you don't think of life as being thorns, but it sure can be. Now, what have we had here? We've had three. We've had the hard soil, in and out the ear. We've had the rocky soil or the shallow soil. Then we've had the thorny soil. Now, those are three. And one might say, well, obviously the second category is better than the first. And the third category is probably better than the other two. But let me ask you this. If you're a gardener, are you going to keep any of those plants? Let's say you have a real strict HOA. And you've got a tree that's in one of those three categories. How long are you going to keep that tree? Oh, let's just wait a little while. No, eventually it's pretty obvious there's nothing there. There's nothing going on. Every one of these three categories are unproductive. Every one of them. So what do you do with something that's unproductive? You either fix it or you get rid of it. Because if you're a gardener, you don't keep dead plants. You get rid of them. So I don't think there are four categories. I know people say 25%, 25%, 25%. No. I see it as two. The unproductive and the productive. And I realize that some, 160 and 30, but that's nobody's decision except what the Lord does in the person's life. The fact of the matter is, it's productive. Think about it this way. Living plants grow. Dead plants don't. They just don't. And you know what happens with dead plants. See, Jesus knew that the kingdom of God would not be built on numb, shallow, or choked believers. Instead, they would be on people whose roots become deep and their lives become productive. And what did he tell the audience before they dispersed? He who has ears, let him hear, because many hear, but few listen. I was in my third year at the church I pastored in southern Oklahoma. And I met a guy by the name of Rob. Now, Rob just lived about 1.5 miles from the church. Fairly well-to-do individual, an individual who actually worked for a not-for-profit company there in Duncan, Oklahoma. And he had a wife and 2 kids that were in high school. But he didn't go to church. Oh, I had gone to visit him a time or two. He was always very cordial, but I think he was more cordial saying, "Nice to meet you, Pastor," and out the door I went. And then all of a sudden, their son got saved. And it was obvious because the son just came forward and says, "I want to know Jesus." I mean, you didn't have to ask or badger or anything. I mean, the fruit was ripe. And so he prayed to receive Christ, and that was it for Zach. Zach became a thriving believer. All of a sudden, his sister came forward and said, "At church camp a few years ago, I made a commitment, but I didn't follow through." And the two of them were baptized very soon after that. Well, the mother of the two, the wife of Rob, had been a church member for years, but because of trying to keep peace, or however you want to say it, was just doing her quiet reverence at home. But all three of them started coming, all three of them started becoming active, and Rob started coming to church, sat right on the second row, listened to everything I said. Until one day he said, "Brother Ken, I'd like to take you out to lunch. I'd like to talk to you about church." And I said, "You don't have to ask me twice." So off we went. And so he began talking about his life, and that he saw the difference that all of this made to his family's life, and he'd like to make a difference in his own. And I said, "Rob, do you know Jesus?" And he began talking about something that happened way back in his childhood when he was 6 or 7. And yeah. And he said he was a very productive individual and a pillar in the community and all of this. And finally, I just stopped him. I said, "Rob, that's all fine and good." And these are my exact words. "That's all fine and good, Rob, but if you don't know Jesus, you're as lost as a goose." And he said, "I'm going to have to think about that for a while." And he didn't show up anymore. And I thought, oh no, he's not coming back. Well, I knew he was going on a business trip, so I went and told his wife, I said, "Look, I've got some things for him." I found every piece of literature I could find, every gospel tract I could find in my office. Things that had just been sitting there, seed that had just been sitting there for a while. Piled them in a bag, gave it to Barb. I said, "Please give this to Rob for his trip." And so Rob took them. I knew when he came back, so that afternoon when he came back, I called him on the phone. I said, "Rob, how was your trip?" Blah, blah, blah. Finally got to the point. I said, "Rob, had you had a chance to read those tracts?" He said, "I read every one of them." I said, "Did you notice at the end of the tracts there were actually some possible prayers to pray?" He says, "Yeah, I took one and I read it. And I prayed it." He says, "Out here in my gazebo." I said, "What do you think happened?" He says, "Well, I guess that means I'm following the Lord now." And I said, "Well, I guess that means I need to come over and give you a hug." And so as we went and began to talk, all of a sudden his life began to just glow. The more and more he talked about the decision he just made, he was just emphatic. And you could see the smile on his face and the glow in his heart. And I thought, well, look at this. Seed planted. But it didn't just stop there. I saw a transformation. He sat down with his 3 family members there in the house and apologized to them for the life that he had lived and the ways he had acted. He began showing up every single time the church was open, and then some. He came back to me a couple of weeks later. He says, "Well, Ken, I've done it." I said, "What have you done?" He says, "Well, I've read the Bible." I said, "Oh, that's good, Rob. That's what you're supposed to do." He says, "No, you don't understand. I've read the Bible." "How much of it have you read, Rob?" "All of it." "You read all of the Bible in 3 weeks?" He said, "Yeah." 2 weeks later, he came back and he said, "I've read it again." I said, "You've read the Bible completely through in 5 weeks? Twice?" He said, "Yeah, but I guess it takes a lifetime to understand." I said, "At least." He would say, "What can I do? What can I do? What can I do?" And he wasn't asking, "What can I do for salvation?" He said, "What can I do to help? What can I do to help?" I mean, it didn't matter what it was. He was there. Anything that needed to be done, he started doing. Back at his not-for-profit, he sat down with all of his employees and he said, "I need to ask forgiveness of you for how I have lived, how I've behaved, how I've treated you unkindly. And I'm going to tell you, things are going to be different. And if you see there's something wrong with my life, please let me know. And I will do everything in my power with God's help." Now, not everybody, followed what he was saying, but they all said to a person, "This guy is different." I remember him speaking at Williams Baptist several years ago at my invitation, and he began talking about that transformation. And one of those books that really transformed his life was the book of Ecclesiastes. One day, though, while I was in my office, he came to my office and he said, "Ken, I've got a problem." And I thought, uh-oh. Some of you are probably waiting for the shoe to drop, weren't you? All of a sudden, he said, he had been a Christian now for 18 months. Things were really, really happening. And because he had been a Christian for 18 months, we really thought that we were going to ordain him as a deacon. Well, I would never think about doing that with anybody that had only been a Christian for 18 months, but I had seen so much different night and day in his life that I thought that the whole church said it was obvious. But one day he came into my office before that happened. He says, "I've got a problem." I thought, okay, what is it? This is basically what he said. He said, "Ever since I've said yes to Jesus, my life has changed. God has done so many wonderful things in my life. I can't thank him enough for all of them. I can't even think of all the different things that God has changed in my life." And I thought something was wrong with my ears. And I said, "Okay, Rob, I didn't hear a problem there." And then this is what he said. He said, "My problem is I've only been a Christian for a very short time and my life has been transformed." He said, "But Ken, why is it that some who have been a member of this church in this town for decades, I see no difference at all in their lives?" And all I could think was, open our ears, Lord, that we may hear. In the name of Christ, we ask it. Amen.